Bleach, the secret god who humbled Yhwach. Like, share, and subscribe. Episode 41, Leeway. When Yu Taifeng heard what the Grey Wolf said, he also understood what the other party meant. In fact, when facing Yhwach yesterday, he didn't take such trivial matters into his heart. It just treated the other party as the subject of his own experiment. After he used 90 of Hado, Black Coffin, he never thought about the life and death of the other party. After all, Yhwach is his Keto-S experiment, and whether he can survive depends on his own destiny. But what surprised him a bit was that the opponent was seriously injured and dying despite his own move. But in the end, he was lucky to get his life back. This also made Yu Taifeng sigh that the Shinigami who had been fighting for many years in Hueco Mundo still had some means. Let's not talk about anything else, just rely on Yhwach's rough skin and thick flesh. I am afraid that his strength is infinitely close to that of an ordinary captain. A black coffin is just a small punishment for him. I believe that many guys who still have ideas about themselves, after seeing that scene, they dare not act rashly. The effect of killing chickens and monkeys is sometimes much stronger than killing them all. Yu Taifeng also didn't bother to care about each other, after all, he still has a lot of work to do. However, just now, Grey Wolf hurriedly told himself that wanted to see him. This could not help but made Yu Taifeng feel helpless. After thinking quickly for a while, Yu Taifeng calmly said to Grey Wolf, "Brother Grey Wolf, I still have a lot of work to do. As for the one you mentioned, I think you know his character better than I do. Just trouble you to run one more time and tell him what he has to ask him to come to me directly." After hearing Yu Taifeng's words, although the Grey Wolf felt helpless for a while, there was nothing to do. One is the current strongest Hueco Mundo expeditionary army, who has been dealing with himself for hundreds of years. On the other side is the rising star whom I just met yesterday. Looking at the cheerful youth in front of him, the Grey Wolf only felt his head grow larger. But due to the disparity in affection and strength, he can only do the work of spreading the message to the end. "Brother Taotai, I'm going now." The Grey Wolf gave Yu Taifeng an awkward glance, then quickly left. Yu Taifeng looked at the back of the other party, and began to think in his heart. Although, he didn't want to bother about this kind of meaningless meddling. However, he is also a little curious, what kind of person is the #1 strongman in the Hueco Mundo expeditionary army? In a short while, Grey Wolf walked towards him with a middle-aged man wearing a tyrant costume and long hair. "Master Frost Moon, this is the gluttonous brother who just joined us yesterday. Brother Gourmet, this is the #1 strong in our expeditionary army, Lord Frost Moon." Although the Grey Wolf was a little embarrassed, he still introduced the two to each other. "Brother Grey Wolf, I really trouble you. If there is nothing to do, you can do it first." The middle-aged man called Genryūsai said. "Where is Lord Genryūsai? This is just a matter of effort. You talk first, I'll go first." The Grey Wolf turned around and nodded with a smile, and said, "Read more at mtlarchive.com. Before leaving, he looked at Yu Taifeng and nodded slightly, then turned around and left. When the Grey Wolf left, the two stood motionless and began to look at each other. Half a minute later, Genryūsai had a faint smile on her face, with no expression. Then he took the lead and said, "Toddy? What a strange name. However, I still want to thank you for being able to let go of that fellow Yhwach yesterday. I am Genryūsai, thanks to the love of the brothers and sisters here, I am the leader who temporarily leads everyone." Yu Taifeng looked at the elegant man in front of him, and replied after a long time, "You don't have to say much to thank you, just a little punishment. As for the matter of ruling everyone, in fact, it has nothing to do with me." Genryūsai looked at Yu Taifeng, who was expressionless, and shook her head helplessly. "I'm a little bit hypocritical, haha. Wouldn't the gluttonous brothers invite me in and sit down?" After seeing that the other party was not malicious at all, Yu Taifeng smiled at his horns, pointed his finger at his tent, and said, "Please." After several hours of communication, Yu Taifeng also had a new understanding of the Hueco Mundo he was in. According to the information Genryūsai told him, he also learned a lot of things that he didn't know. For example, the expeditionary force sent by Siriidii did not actually have any combat missions. The only thing they have to do is to find a way to survive in Hueco Mundo. After the dispatch time expires, someone will pick them up and return to Soul Society. In addition, the current Hueco Mundo is actually full of dangers everywhere. There are not only some dead places where Shinigami can't walk, but also Minos Grande who are staring in the dark. Since Shinigami's body exudes its unique Ryatsu, some of them, in order to evolve to a higher level, will often attack them as outsiders in groups. In short, Hueco Mundo is full of uncertain dangers. Although this is a virtual paradise, it is definitely Shinigami's hell. Thinking that he would have to spend 500 years here, Yu Taifeng's heart was filled with helplessness. He has secretly vowed in his heart that he must try his best to improve his strength here. In a flash, 100 years later. On this day, Yu Taifeng refused the help of Genryūsai and others, and once again embarked on his own path of cultivation. After 100 years of improvement, the density of souls in his body has reached a terrifying level. With the sharp increase in the density of Reiko, the Ryatsu he released also increased geometrically. In these 100 years, he has not only used the box-picking system to improve his own strength. In my spare time, I use Omniscience and Omnipotence to optimize and transform some Kido. Apart from fighting and studying, he often exchanged views with members of the Hueco Mundo Expeditionary Army. By the way, guide them while discussing. In fact, as early as 90 years ago, he became the recognized #1 powerhouse. However, Yu Taifeng doesn't care about this kind of meaningless fictitious name. For him, the boundless Hueco Mundo is an inexhaustible treasure house. Because he has always made improving his own strength his top priority. Now, he decided to go to Minos Grande Forest, which he hadn't been to for a long time. After all, only there is the real place for him to fight. At this time, somewhere in Hueco Mundo. Above the endless white desert, a huge palace is under construction. A huge, but withered black branches protruded from the ground to the ground. Countless small and medium-sized phantoms, under the surveillance of larger phantoms, are busy handling pieces of white boulders. A middle-aged man wearing a luxurious robe and a crown, surrounded by dozens of Jillians, came not far from the White Palace. Looking at the busy men in front of him, the middle-aged man nodded in satisfaction. Afterwards, he exclaimed vigorously, "Finally evolved into Vasto Lord, this feeling is so wonderful. Those idiots in Minos Grande Forest, no matter how clever they are, they would never think of them. I will let my subordinates build the palace on top of the Minos Grande Forest." Ha ha ha. At this moment, a huge Jillian slowly moved his body and came not far from the middle-aged man. When the Jillian saw the opponent, he hurriedly lowered his head. Afterwards, it quickly reported something to the middle-aged man in a language that only the imaginary could understand. After a long time, Ryatsu suddenly broke out on the middle-aged man. But wherever this Ryatsu affects, all the imaginary knelt on the ground trembling, afraid to move. Shinigami of damn it. How dare you do something to my men? It is good. Very good. In that case, I will let you and the idiots of Minos Grande Forest take a good look. I. Berrigan Lusenbairn is the king of this world. Berrigan floated in midair, roaring loudly. Episode 42, Fiery Scorched Earth. Berrigan, floating in midair, commanded his men to assemble. Soon after, the murderous Berrigan led the crew to leave quickly. At this time, Yu Taifeng, who was slowly moving towards the Minos Grande Forest, began to collect his own trophies after beheading a few medium-sized empties that had besieged him. Ding. Congratulations to the host for acquiring Ryatsu's 986. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the virtual armor fragment X3. After feeling the weak growth in himself, Ryatsu, he smiled helplessly and continued to move towards his destination. After half a day's journey, he finally came to the outermost entrance of Minos Grande Forest. At this time, the lively scene in the distance caught his attention. Huh? The White Palace? Yu Taifeng whispered, while using Shuanpa one after another, hurried towards the White Palace. On a sand dune 100 meters away from the palace, he finally saw the distant scene clearly. Outside the unfinished White Palace, there are a large number of imaginary busy laborers. Looking around, there are almost tens of thousands of small phantoms. Although there are not so many medium-sized virtual and giant virtuals, they add up to hundreds of them. It was then that he suddenly thought of why he had an inexplicably familiar feeling. Because the unfinished palace in front of me is a bit similar to the Shuya Palace in Shinigami's original work. Coupled with his current position, Yu Taifeng can already be determined. The palace being built in front of him is undoubtedly the Shuya Palace. At this moment, he couldn't help but think of the relevant plot in Shinigami's original work. Shuya Palace, as Aizen's base camp after entering Soul Society, is still very impressive. However, before Aizen rebelled, the owner here was someone else. It is the second blade in Hueco Mundo Espada, symbolizing the aging Genryūsai gang. Reminiscent of Berrigan after possessing the power of Arrancar, Yu Taifeng also has to sigh for his power. However, the initiator of all this is Aizen. It can be seen that Aizen, as the most character and ambitious villain in the Shinigami world, is still very capable. However, according to the current timeline, Aizen's grandfather may not have been born yet. After thinking of this, Yu Taifeng didn't have too many worries. After all, no matter how strong Berrigan is, without Arrancar, he is just a limited Basto Lord. From entering Hueco Mundo to the present, in 100 years, Yu Taifeng has killed countless empties. However, Minos Grande of Berrigan's level, he really hasn't encountered one. He is starting to look forward to it now. Will he meet each other today? Read more at mtlarchive.com. In the eyes of Yu Taifeng, those who are still working 100 meters away are undoubtedly thousands of Ryatsu who can only walk. After some thoughts, he pulled out his Zanpakuto and rushed to the direction of Shuya Palace at the fastest speed. Roar. At the outermost periphery of the Sui Palace, several Jillians were responsible for guarding work. After seeing the strange invaders, they roared one after another. There were tens of thousands of different kinds of emptiness who were already busy. After seeing the intruder alone, they turned their eyes to him. When they felt the breath of Shinigami on Yu Taifeng's body, they all screamed in excitement. It seems that the intruder in front of them has become the delicious food in their belly. Swallow it. Gourmet. With Yu Taifeng's soft drink, the black Zanpakuto in his hand also completed Shirkai in an instant. At this moment, a wave of majestic Ryatsu spouted from Yu Taifeng's body. Thousands of the weakest and weakest small virtual creatures all trembled after feeling this terrifying Ryatsu. The Jillians who were in charge of guarding, after a few strange roars. All the voids within the Shuya Palace quickly began to gather, and launched an attack in the direction of Yu Taifeng. Thousands of phantoms were like black tides, with strange sounds in their mouths. They scrambled towards Yu Taifeng's position, their eyes full of tyranny and greed. At this moment, Yu Taifeng stepped on the ground fiercely, and after covering his whole body, Yu Taifeng jumped directly into the air. The end of the thousand hands, the noble hand who cannot touch the dark, the heavenly archer who cannot be reflected. The glorious fall of the road, fan the wind of igniting the seeds, gather and gather without being confused. Just follow what I said, light bullets, 8 bodies, 9 articles, celestial scriptures, ill treasures, and big wheels. The grey turret, leading the bow to the distance, dissipated brightly. 91 of Hado, 1,000-hand Jiaoyan Taipao. When Yu Taifeng was in midair, the chant was finished quickly. I saw a violent spirit converging between his hands. In an instant, hundreds of huge red light, with the thickness of buckets, condensed in midair in an instant. Motivated by a burst of majestic wind attributes, the red light quickly smashed towards the virtual group on the ground. Rumble. The sky-shaking sound and explosion sound resounded above the Sui Palace. These hundreds of red rays hit the ground at an indescribable terrifying speed. At this time, the white desert outside Shuya Palace had already turned blood red. Those small and medium-sized imaginaries with the weakest strength were instantly evaporated by the blazing high temperature. And those giant imaginary bodies that are relatively large, and a few Jillians, have been affected to varying degrees. The white desert at the foot of Yu Taifeng has already turned into a piece of scorched earth. He nodded in satisfaction and gave up Kito's singing directly. Condensed one after another in midair, more light than before. Only this time, the light that represents death is not only red. Spirits of various attributes are active in the air, and even the space is faintly unstable. In an instant, hundreds of colorful giant rays of light, like rain, attacked the giant Su and Jillian that survived on the ground. Swallow. Yu Taifeng, floating in the air, like a god on the 9 heavens, let out a deafening roar. Whether it was death or surviving Su, Ryatsu and Reiko on them were directly drawn out of their bodies by a violent force. Thousands of blue Ryatsu and Lingzi, at this moment, actually merged into a substantive blue current, which was madly absorbed by Yu Taifeng and Zanpakuto in his hands. This person in midair made a stab, like 2 bottomless black holes, swallowing everything around him madly. Countless miserable strange roars came from the ground. Yu Taifeng looked at everything under his feet blankly, and after the final devouring, Yu Taifeng gave a satisfied smile. He held Zanpakuto in his hands tightly with both hands, rushed down from midair, and let out a sky-shaking roar. As he swung the sword, Zanpakuto in his hand, under the blessing of the majestic Ryatsu, projected a Zanpakuto phantom that was hundreds of meters long. At this time, the giant Su and Jillian remaining on the ground, their bodies are like tofu cut with a sharp sword, split into 2. When Yu Taifeng went outside the Shuya Palace, after all the virtual beheads were exhausted. In his mind, the system prompt sounded. Ding. The box around the host is detected. Is the host turned on? He looked at the scorched black desert under his feet and the thousands of boxes, his face lifted slightly and whispered, "Turn on." Episode 43, Gourmet Fury, Ding. Congratulations to the host for acquiring Ryatsu's 23698. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the virtual armor fragment X10126. When the system beep ended, Yu Taifeng only felt a majestic Ryatsu entering his body. After checking that there were no omissions, he opened his personal properties panel and began to check it. The strongest box picking system, host, Yu Taifeng, age, 118 years old, lineage, human soul, Quincy, void, Ryatsu, 69,527, special skills, omniscience and omnipotence, exploration circuit, kendo, ultimate, white hits, extreme, shuanpa, extreme, kido, hado extreme, bakudo extreme, kaido proficient. After closing his personal attribute panel, he continued to walk in the direction of the Sui Palace. Although, Barragan ordered his men to build the Palace of the Night at this entrance of the Minos Grande forest. However, after the battle just now, there was already no imaginary figure inside and outside the unfinished Shuya Palace. Yu Taifeng walked into the Shuya Palace as if strolling in his own backyard. After some searching, he also found the entrance that had already been sealed. At this time, bursts of angry howls came from the gap in the entrance. Just as he was about to break through the entrance forcibly and enter the Minos Grande forest, an angry roar came from outside the Shuya Palace. Huh? Has the Lord returned? As Yu Taifeng thought, he turned and walked outside the Shuya Palace. When he appeared at the gate of Shuya Palace, he only saw a middle-aged man wearing a crown and wearing a luxurious crown, looking at himself with a chill on his face. Yu Taifeng looked at the other party and the hundreds of phantoms behind him, his face lifted slightly, and he shrugged helplessly. When the opponent appeared in front of his eyes, he had already used the detection circuit to check the opponent's Ryatsu level. Barragan's Ryatsu data also appeared before his eyes. He thought that Barragan's strength was at least the same as his own. As a result, detection loop clearly showed that the opponent's Ryatsu value was only in the first half of 50,000. But thinking that after killing the opponent, he could at least drop a lot of Ryatsu, so he was relieved. At this moment, the upward arc of Yu Taifeng's angle increased a bit again. Barragan never thought that he was just going out for a trip, and that this kind of thing happened in his lair. This makes him, who calls himself the king of Hueco Mundo, how can he not be angry? However, when he saw the opponent's provocative actions, he almost fainted. The enemy in front of him not only beheaded all of his men, but even dared to provoke himself. He was seeking his own death. Read more at mtlarchive.com. Good. 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 Very good. You are challenging the limit of this king. Go to hell. Barragan roared angrily, and threw Zero out of it, which had been brewing for a long time. After seeing Zero rushing towards him, Yu Taifeng's body changed for a while, easily avoiding the opponent's attack. When he appeared again, he was already in the air, not far from Barragan. Looking at the uninvited guest dressed up by Shinigami in front of him, Barragan grumbled coldly and said, "You think you are very capable, don't you? Then let's take a look at these things first." Snort. As soon as Barragan's voice fell, a Jillian behind him opened his jaw and spit out some odds and ends. For a time, the sound of metal collision was endless. After a few seconds, hundreds of Zanpaku swords were piled up on the black sand dunes. How? I didn't expect it? Ahahaha. Barragan looked at Zanpakuto on the ground, his face full of triumph. After laughing wildly for a while, he continued to speak, "Silly Shinigami. Your companion is no longer in the entire Hueco Mundo. Because I have killed them all. Originally, I wanted to have a full meal, but they were too unpalatable. Therefore, I rewarded them to my men." Yu Taifeng looked at the hundreds of Zanpakuto piled up like hills on the ground, frowning, and was silent for a long time. When he turned his gaze from Zanpakuto and turned back to Barragan, he began to exude intense murderous aura. In the 100 years of Hueco Mundo, although he has always been a maverick, but they also had more or less friendship with the members of the expeditionary army. When he saw the pile of Zanpakuto, he also understood that what Barragan said was true. 100 years is not long for him, but he is definitely not a walking dead without any emotions. Thinking back to the bit by bit with the members of the expeditionary force in these 100 years, a wave of nameless anger surged into his heart. Barragan saw Yu Taifeng's expression in his eyes, he smiled triumphantly, and ordered his men to attack. "This is the end of provoking me. Kill him for me." Following Barragan's order, the Minos Grande who followed him began to brew different forms of Zero. "Swallow it. Gourmet." Yu Taifeng roared, decisively liberating his Zanpakuto. Ryatsu burst into the sky from Yu Taifeng, his figure flashed directly behind many Minos Grande the moment after Shirkai. Yu Taifeng and Zanpakuto in his hands once again turned into two huge black holes, absorbing the surrounding Ryatsu and Lingzi frantically. At this time, the Zero sent by the Minos Grande behind Barragan also attacked Yu Taifeng's previous position. Rumble. Dozens of mushroom clouds of different colors continuously rise from the black desert outside the Shuya Palace. The ground within a radius of 10 miles also violently vibrated. However, this massive attack did not cause any harm to Yu Taifeng. Trash. It's all trash. Barragan couldn't help yelling after feeling the powerful Ryatsu after coming to him. He quickly turned around and looked in Yu Taifeng's direction, and at the same time began to brew a new attack again. However, something completely unexpected happened to him. I saw his men actually began to fall in pieces. Even those dozens of Jillian-level Minos Grande are all shaky at this moment. This Ryatsu. What kind of power is this? Barragan looked at Yu Taifeng, who was like a demon in the distance, in shock, exclaiming in disbelief. At this moment, Yu Taifeng of Ryatsu, who had absorbed the huge amount of Ryatsu, held his Zanpakuto in both hands. There was no expression on his face at this moment, and there was an angry shout in his mouth. Die. After Yu Taifeng poured all the Ryatsu he had just absorbed into Zanpakuto, he furiously swung out Zanpakuto in his hand. Boom. Outside the originally desolate Shuya Palace, the sky suddenly began to flash and thunder. A black sword shadow, with a length of hundreds of meters, as condensed as it was, slashed towards the position of Barragan and the Minos Grande. A miserable howl came from the Minos Grande's mouth, and Barragan, who had just been proud, found himself trapped in the air and unable to move. An unprecedented sense of fear enveloped Barragan, and he couldn't figure it out. This was a completely unreasonable blow. How did he do it? I'm afraid it is stronger than the horror power of the sacred imaginary in the Hueco Mundo legend. Can it be compared with it, right? No. I just evolved into Vasto Lord. I can't die. Forgive me. Forgive me. I would like to treat you as king. No, no. When the huge black sword shadow slashed on Barragan's body impartially, there were waves of miserable wailing in his mouth. A few seconds later, a huge crack of 100 meters long appeared on the ground outside the Shuya Palace. And Barragan and his men have already turned into flying ash and disappeared. Episode 44, Killing God. After feeling his nearly exhausted spiritual power, Zanpakuto in Yu Taifeng's hands also automatically cancelled the Shurkai state. It looks like, this should be my strongest blow so far. But being able to pour everything absorbed into Zanpakuto, and then release it, is also a disguised restriction. I wonder if this restriction can be lifted after understanding Bankai. When Yu Taifeng was calculating in his mind, the system prompt sound also appeared in his mind. Ding. The box around the host is detected. Is the host turned on? Yu Taifeng looked at the huge crack outside the Shuya Palace, and whispered softly, open. When the system received the relevant instructions, the prompt to pick up the loot also sounded again. Ding. Congratulations to the host for acquiring Ryuatsix 53789. Ding. Congratulations to the host for getting the ringtone. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the virtual armor fragment X1096. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the Minos Grande forest map. Ding. As a majestic Ryatsu entered Yu Taifeng's body, he also felt his strength improved again. After opening his personal attributes panel, Yu Taifeng found that his Ryatsu value had reached as high as 120,000. According to his previous analysis using Exploration Loop and Omniscience and Omnipotence, his current strength has completely surpassed the captain who can Bankai. As for the powerhouses like Team Zero and Yamamoto, he is not particularly clear. Thinking of Barragan's last begging for mercy, he can probably also think of Vasto Lord's Minos Grande. What is the range of Ryatsu value in his body? But now, he decided to take a break as soon as possible. After all, when Barragan was beheaded by him, the seal in the Shuya Palace, that was not very stable, is now showing signs of loosening. Although with his current strength, he can kill dozens of Jillian-level Minos Grande with a full blow. But for the sake of safety, he decided to recover as soon as possible. A few days later, Yu Taifeng, who had recovered completely, walked out of the Shuya Palace. In the past few days, he also visited the station of the Hueco Mundo Expeditionary Force. But what made him a little disappointed was that Shinigami, who was originally stationed there, was indeed killed by Barragan and his men. At this moment, even Yu Taifeng, who was a lone traveler, sighed in his heart. Although he didn't know the reasons why the members of the expeditionary army came here. But when he thought of Central 40 SIX's style of behavior, the nameless anger in my heart burned again. After sighing for a while, he strengthened his thoughts even more. Vow to be the strongest in this world, read more at mtlarchive.com, rather than being fooled by others, because of fear of someone's power. Thinking of this, Yu Taifeng hurried towards the sealed entrance in the Shuya Palace according to the map of the Minos Grande forest in his mind. Time flies like an arrow, and time flies like an arrow. Another 400 years passed in a blink of an eye. At this time, it is located in a jungle at the lowest level of Minos Grande forest. A young man in a weird dress was holding a handful of black Zanpakuto, chasing several huge Jillians. He has long, jet black hair. Although he looks only in his 20s, he feels like he has gone through vicissitudes of life. Especially his eyes, the black pupils are black and bright, as if they have the magical power to see through everything. He had a pair of white armor on his clothes that couldn't see the color. If you observe carefully, you can easily find out what the material of this white armor is. Amazingly, it is made up of countless virtual armors, little by little. What is even more incredible is that this pair of white armor has no traces of processing at all. It was the Ryatsu that the youth radiated from their bodies, pieced together, and maintained them. He looked at the few Jillians who were fleeing frantically not far away, sadly or not, and whispered blankly, "Swallow it. Gourmet." As the voice just fell, he himself and the Zanpaku sword in his hand were like two bottomless black holes, and began to frantically absorb all Ryatsu and Reiko around them. The few fleeing Jillian, at this time, like a few pools of black mud, fell heavily to the ground and wailed. No one would have thought that Jillian, who was huge in size and 100 meters tall, would be like a mouse seeing a cat at this moment, becoming like this. Cut. As the young man uttered an angry shout, a condensed black sword shadow fell from the sky. In an instant, Jillian, who had fallen to the ground, was cut in half. When the scarlet blood just spewed from them, it evaporated directly under a mysterious force. A strong smell of blood permeated the jungle, within a radius of a few miles. The imaginary people of different forms, as if seeing their own end, began to run wildly in different directions. They rushed eagerly, as if there was some indescribable horror in that jungle. Roar. A medium-sized emptiness about 10 meters tall was slammed under the feet by Jillian, who was also rushing away from behind, and instantly turned into a cloud of blood and disappeared. Arenilo. Hurry up. Run away. That killer is here again, an alien with 2 heads shouted loudly. Elialuyali. Stop arguing. Give me control of your body. Otherwise we will all die today. Yishingsu's other slightly larger head also roared anxiously at this moment. In a panic, the speed of this 2-headed alien void increased to the extreme, and it was so crazy that it quickly fled towards the distance. Yu Taifeng casually glanced at the boxes on the ground. After collecting the fallen trophies, he randomly slapped a few white fragments the size of a fingernail on the white armor he was wearing. It took a long time, and the result was Ryatsu in the single digits. He shook his head mutteringly. The chaos in the lower level of Minos Grande Forest continued. After experiencing it with Ryatsu, he rushed up from the ground and left quickly. At this moment, all the emptiness in the lower layer of Minos Grande Forest, after feeling the horror Ryatsu that is getting farther and farther, stopped running for their lives one after another. But no matter how high these imaginary levels are, their faces at this moment are a remnant expression. Go away. That killer is gone. Great. We survived. I'm going to the deepest part of Minos Grande Forest. It might be safer there. Are you crazy? Even if the Jillian level Minos Grande goes to the deepest point, it may be more fierce. I would rather be swallowed by a Juches or even Vasto Lord than die at the hands of the murderer. The imaginary people of different forms are communicating with lingering fears at this time. After a day of hunting activities, Yu Taifeng did not return to the Suyi Palace to rest as usual. Instead, it came to the sky over the site of the former Hueco Mundo Expeditionary Army Station. At this moment, his front face was cold, looking at the crack that appeared in front of him for a long time. Dozens of Shinigami in Death Tyrant costumes walked out of the crack. Shinigami, who was in the lead, saw a weird figure in white armor in the distance. With a solemn expression, he shouted, "Be careful. Enemy attack. Thank you very much for the monthly pass of 113x times 532 and 178xxxxx090. Thank you for your support. Episode 45, A Genius 500 Years Ago, Be Careful. Enemy attack." Leading Shinigami saw the figure standing volley not far away, and said solemnly to the men behind him. Shinigami, who had just appeared on the team, took out their Zanpakuto and made preparations while following the orders. However, something unexpected happened to them. The white figure that seemed to be imaginary appeared in front of them in an instant. Only then did they clearly see what the white figure in front of them looked like. I saw that he was actually wearing a pair of white armor, and the color of his clothes was already indistinctly similar to that of the Death Tyrant. Yu Taifeng's expression was calm, and he frowned slightly when he saw the leader who was somewhat familiar in front of him. A day ago, Kuchiki Silver Ridge, who was promoted to the captain of the 6th Division, received instructions from the Shinigami team. He was ordered to go to Hueco Mundo on the second day and bring Yu Taifeng, one of the former members of the Hueco Mundo Expeditionary Army, back to Soul Society. 500 years ago, Central 40 SIXS adjudicated service time had expired. Kuchiki Yinling, who was temporarily assigned, was full of curiosity after receiving the task. The name Yu Taifeng may have been forgotten by many people in Soul Society. Or, not well known by some of the younger generations now. However, as a classmate of Yu Taifeng at the same time, Kuchiki Yinling was very impressed with him. After all, the other party was once recognized as the first genius in the Spiritual Arts Academy, and even in the entire Soul Society. There is even a legend circulating in Siriidii. The current 13th Squad and various systems are inextricably linked to him. In 500 years, the vicissitudes of life have been vicissitudes. Kuchiki Yinling was really curious about what this genius who was with him would look like now. And what will happen to his strength. At this time, Shinigami of the team realized that it was a misunderstanding. Kuchiki Yinling looked a little surprised, Yu Taifeng wearing a white armor in front of him. After signaling his subordinates to lift their guard, he looked at the strange and familiar figure in front of him with interest. Then he said in a serious tone, Yu Taifeng, the 500-year service time has come, I am waiting to be ordered to bring you back to Soul Society. Let's go. After a long time, Yu Taifeng responded. At this time, all the men behind Kuchiki Yinling began to talk quietly. He really spent 500 years in Hueco Mundo alone? Why is this name familiar? Looking at his embarrassed look, it must have been uncomfortable for 500 years in Hueco Mundo. Who knows, maybe he has special escape skills. Read more at mtlarchive.com. Kuchiki Yinling coughed slightly, signaling the men behind him to be quiet. Just when he was about to speak again, motioning for Yu Taifeng to follow him. I saw a phantom in the blink of an eye, quickly skipping everyone and flying into the portal connected to Soul Society. Seeing this scene, Yinling shook his head helplessly, and his subordinates also flew into the portal behind him. On the way back, everyone looked at the rapidly changing figure in the distance and exclaimed. His speed, so fast. It seems that it was not accidental that he survived. If you can live in Hueco Mundo for 500 years, so can you. I am really ashamed of this effort to escape. Haha. Kuchiki Yinling ignored the whispering men behind him. With a serious expression, although he was a little surprised in his heart, he was even more curious about why he couldn't feel Ryatsu on the other person. Also, the scavengers that often appear in the transmission channel did not even appear. Is it all just coincidence? After a while, Yu Taifeng passed through the portal and returned to Soul Society again. Looking at the strange and familiar environment in front of him, he felt mixed feelings for a while. Your armor is very special. Why is there a virtual aura? Kuchiki Yinling appeared behind Yu Taifeng and asked with a face full of confusion. It's just a collection to pass the time, it's no big deal. Yu Taifeng said. After looking up and down, Kuchiki Yinling's face was full of incredible expressions. Because he discovered that the white armor that the opponent was wearing was made of virtual armor. And this pair of white armor is divided into several layers inside and out. It seems that in these 500 years, a lot of people have died under your Zanpakuto. Kuchiki Yinling sighed. Yu Taifeng turned and looked at Yinling, which was mixed with white feather texture and family clothing, shook his head slightly, and said casually, in fact, it's not much, probably just a few million. What? After hearing the other party's reply, Yinling was surprised and disappointed in her heart. Time is such a terrible thing. A genius 500 years ago, now he has learned to speak big. Can one person kill a million heads? I am afraid I can only cheat those little guys in Spiritual Arts Academy. The disappointed Kuchiki Yinling sighed heavily and said with a serious face, come with me, the captain should already be waiting for you. On the way to the station of the 1st Division, the two did not communicate anymore. After a while, they came to a large hall. At this time, Chojiro Sasakaibe, with short white hair, came to them unhurriedly after seeing the two. Captain Yinling, thank you for your hard work. I also want to take him to see the captain, so I'll leave first. Chojiro nodded slightly to Yinling, then smiled and motioned for Yu Taifeng to follow him. The two walked side by side and soon came outside Yamamoto's office. The captain has been waiting for you for a long time, please come in. Chojiro knocked on the door lightly and said at the same time. When Yu Taifeng just walked into Yamamoto's office, a familiar voice came to his ears. Ha ha ha. Little guy. Long time no see. After Wang Yu with curly hair saw Yu Taifeng, a Shuimpa came next to him, patted his shoulder, and said excitedly. Oh. Your white armor looks good. How can there be a breath of vein? Is it made of virtual armor? Wang Yu looked up and down curiously, and said to himself. Yu Taifeng looked at the familiar figure in front of him, finally a faint smile appeared on his calm face, and said, Master Sword God, long time no see. After exchanging a few words with the other party, Yu Taifeng also looked at the stalwart figure standing by the window. Hey. Yamamoto. Why are you pretending to be deep again? Wang Yu walked to the side of Yamamoto Chongwa carelessly and said loudly. At this time, Yamamoto, who had been facing Yu Taifeng with his back, also slowly turned around. When he saw Yu Taifeng, who was silent not far away, his half-squinted eyes slowly opened. A majestic and terrifying Ryatsu burst out of Yamamoto's body, and quickly rolled towards Yu Taifeng where he was standing. Episode 46, Ryatsu Showdown. When this majestic and terrifying Ryatsu spouted out of Yamamoto's body. Standing next to him, Wang Yu took a step back and exclaimed, Hey. Yamamoto. What are you doing? Wang Yu hurriedly looked in the direction of Yu Taifeng, for fear that he would be knocked down by this Ryatsu. At this moment, Yu Taifeng looked calmly at Yamamoto, who had just turned around. After feeling the powerful Ryatsu coming to his face, he did not make any defensive moves, letting this Ryatsu impact on him. Yamamoto Shijoku looked at Yu Taifeng, who was as solid as a rock, with a flash of light in his eyes. Immediately, he directly increased the released Ryatsu several times. Yu Taifeng's seemingly thin body bears the increasingly strong impact of Ryatsu. He is like a lighthouse standing in the ocean. Although he has been under the impact of Ryatsu, he still looks calmly at Yamamoto not far away. Yamamoto let out a soft snort with some doubts, a scorching gaze in his eyes. Yu Taifeng looked at Yamamoto not far away, and released all the Ryatsu in his body to counter the opponent. He had already opened the exploration loop, and at this moment he also saw the change in Yamamoto's Ryatsu. I saw that Yamamoto's Ryatsu value has gradually increased from the original 100,000 yuan to the current 150,000 yuan. Yamamoto, who seemed calm, was also surprised at the moment. In the beginning, he just wanted to test the opponent's strength. However, he would never have thought that at the beginning, he had half the strength of his peak state, and he couldn't help the opponent at all. This also made him even more curious about how far Yu Taifeng's strength has been raised 500 years later. After raising his Ryatsu again by a few percent, Yamamoto found that the opponent had not only failed to respond as expected. Ryatsu could even burst out and compete with himself. Wang Yu looked at the two people who were not giving way to each other, and his eyes widened in shock. For a long time, although he has an inexplicable expectation and trust in Yu Taifeng. And he also believes that when Yu Taifeng returns from Hueco Mundo, he will definitely increase his strength to a terrifying state. But today, he would never think of it. The genius of more than 500 years ago has now reached this level. The level of toughness that can be equal to Yamamoto. As an old friend of Yamamoto's powerful country, Wang Yu naturally knows how powerful the opponent is. In the entire Soul Society, those who can collide with him in Ryatsu and are evenly matched are probably only a few people from their Zero Division. Read more at mtlarchive.com. At this moment, all Shinigami in the Zero Division's resident's face was full of shock after feeling the two Ryatsu in the direction of Yamamoto's office. At the same time, located in the 11th Division's resident, a young woman with long black hair, wearing a deadly tyrant and white feather weave, also looked suspiciously towards the direction of the group's resident. Those two evenly matched horrors, Ryatsu, made her as Kenpachi feel a little bit jealous. What surprised her most was that in those two Ryatsu, she actually felt a breath of déjà vu. However, both the Ryatsu and the unique breath in Ryatsu have changed greatly from the past. The Ryatsu now gives people a feeling of rejection. And there is a lingering murderous aura mixed in it. In her mind, a lingering shadow appeared in an instant. You are finally back. Mao Jihua's lips opened lightly and said softly. I just walked out of Kuchiki Silver Ridge, not far from the team station, and felt a sigh in my heart. He couldn't figure out how the once brilliant genius would now be reduced to a big talker. Several millions of empty heads? Haha. Yinling shook his head helplessly and smiled bitterly. Just when he was about to use Shuanpa and hurried back to his team station as soon as possible. The two majestic Ryatsu rose up from the office of the first team captain. How is this possible? Kuchiki Yinling looked back in shock, and suddenly felt a sense of powerlessness. He hurriedly released all of his Ryatsu, trying to resist the shock caused by the two shocking Ryatsu. However, an inexplicable sense of fear made him palpitate. The last time he felt this way was on that day 500 years ago. He clearly remembered the despair and fear that he and his classmates were sucked away from Ryatsu. The confrontation in Yamamoto's heavy country office continues. At this moment, as a bystander, Wang Yu finally couldn't help shouting, Hey! Yamamoto! Stop! Do you two want to make this place upside down? Yu Taifeng's long black hair was windless. He calmly looked at Yamamoto in front of him, without any expression on his face. With Wang Yu's roar, the two Ryatsu that had collided with each other gradually disappeared. After an invisible duel, Yamamoto Shigekuni nodded softly and said softly, Very good. Yu Taifeng looked at Yamamoto indifferently, not knowing what was thinking in his mind. At this time, Yamamoto slowly walked up to Yu Taifeng, his eyes full of approval, and he said in a relieved tone, Sure enough, I didn't disappoint the old man. So next, I don't know what plans you have? After hearing Yamamoto's words, Yu Taifeng replied coldly, It's just a fluke, thanks to the captain for your love. As for the plan mentioned by the captain, I haven't figured it out yet. Wang Yu looked at the two people who were talking, held his head helplessly, and said, It's obviously a happy thing, how come it has become like this when I get to you? And you, little guy. Unexpectedly, you have reached this point. Hey. Yamamoto. With his current strength, you have to arrange for him to be a captain anyway, right? Ha. Yamamoto directly ignored Wang Yu, stepped forward again, and said, Yu Taifeng, are you interested in becoming the deputy captain of my first team? Haha. Yamamoto. You are finally generous this time. Brat. Promise him quickly. The deputy captain of the first division is not comparable to those of the other divisions. Wang Yu urged, and looked at Yu Taifeng expectantly. At this moment, even as calm as Yamamoto, a look of hope appeared on his face. Sorry, Captain. Having been alone in Hueco Mundo for so many years, I have become accustomed to that kind of unfettered life. If you have to arrange a position for me, please arrange a free position for me. Episode 47, Clean Tower Kulin. Yamamoto and Wang Yu would never have thought that Yu Taifeng would directly refuse. After hearing these words, Wang Yu said helplessly, "Little guy. You are so anxious to me. Hey, forget it. A genius like you really cannot be understood by common sense." Yamamoto Chonghua looked at Yu Taifeng in front of him. After a long silence, he shook his head slightly and said slowly, "Since you don't want to work in the team, then go to the Great Lingshu Gallery. Someone will take you there later. Go ahead." After Yamamoto said these words, he sighed deeply, then turned around and stopped speaking. After a while, Chojiro Sasuke walked into the office. He bowed beside Yamamoto and listened for a few minutes before leaving here with Yu Taifeng. Wang Yu looked at Yamamoto Chonghua, who was silent, and said, "Yamamoto, this is different from what you and I had originally imagined." Yamamoto replied in a heavy voice, "My old friend, remember that Central 46 announced the abolition of the Hueco Mundo Expeditionary Army 400 years ago?" The careless Wang Yu also became serious at this time, and said softly, "How can I not remember that kind of thing? If not 400 years ago, all members of the Expeditionary Army except him would have been killed. I am afraid that until now, that unfavorable system may still exist. However, this does seem a bit unfair to him, who is the only survivor." Yamamoto picked up the teacup on the table and took a casual sip, and said again, "Maybe you were right. At that time, I should fight against all opinions and find a way to save him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be what he is now. I think you just noticed that his current strength is infinitely close to mine. In fact, from the day he entered Siriidii, I wanted to cultivate him as a mainstay like you and me. It's a pity now." At this time, Wang Yu seemed to be infected by Yamamoto's emotions, and sighed softly, "I don't know what he has experienced in the 500 years of Hueco Mundo. Forget it, I'll go to the monk's place for a stroll." After leaving Yamamoto's office, Yu Taifeng followed Chojiro Sasuke out of the group station. On the way to the Great Lingshu corridor, Yu Taifeng unexpectedly saw the hurried figure of Kuchiki Yinling. When Yinling saw the oncoming Yu Taifeng and Chojiro, he smiled awkwardly at the two, then increased the speed to the extreme, before disappearing in a while. Half an hour later, Yu Taifeng, led by Chojiro, came to a building complex. Read more at mtlarchive.com. Hundreds of white towers of various sizes are located in orderly branches throughout the building complex. Chojiro led Yu Taifeng. After completing all the procedures, he smiled and said, "Everything is arranged, I will leave first." Seeing the figure drifting away, Yu Taifeng took the identity card and death tyrant he had just received, and walked towards his residence. At this time, a young Shinigami dressed in aristocratic costumes passed by Yu Taifeng, surrounded by his underlings. "Stop," the young Shinigami shouted. When he saw the strange figure in the white armor and ignored himself, he directly led the people to stop the way. The young Shinigami was very interested and looked up and down at Yu Taifeng, who was wearing a weird dress. However, the latter seemed to treat them as air and walked forward on his own. "Big brother. How dare he ignore you," a subordinate said to the young Shinigami's ear. He couldn't hold back his face, and after hearing the words of his men, he gently curled his head. Then a group of people stopped in front of Yu Taifeng again, with a provocative look one after another. "Didn't you hear me? I told you to stop." The young Shinigami glared at Yu Taifeng and shouted. At this time, his subordinates also began to help. "Brother. This guy is not only dressed in weird clothes, but also sneaky. Maybe there is a conspiracy. Huh. Maybe it was a travel accident that came in from Rukongai. You have to ask clearly. Do you know what this place is? Just dare to walk in with a big swing. Don't talk nonsense with him. Catch him first." Only then did the young Shinigami notice that Yu Taifeng had a brand new death tyrant and identity card. But he, who has always acted unscrupulously, is unwilling to lose face before his hands. He snorted coldly, then laughed instead. "Do you know who I am? How dare you treat me with this attitude? Looking at your poor and desolate look, you are not a good person if you want to come." One of his subordinates, for fear that he might not be eye-catching enough, pointed his finger at the young Shinigami, and said with a smug expression, "This is our eldest brother. The young master of the Tsuneyashiro family, one of the 5 nobles today. Honorable Master Tsuneyashiro Ishiyu." The young Shinigami nodded in satisfaction after hearing the introduction of his subordinates, and let out a cold snort again. Another subordinate behind him glanced at his comrade in dissatisfaction, took the conversation unwillingly, and said, "Do you know who the grandfather of Big Brother Shiryu is? His grandfather is the longest-serving judge in Central 46, Tsuneyadai Long. In the entire Central 46, 1/3 of the seats are adults from the Tsuneyashiro clan. Hurry up and apologize to our big brother." Otherwise, when he gets angry, the consequences are not something you can bear. Yu Taifeng looked at the people who sang a harmony in front of them, and looked at them blankly. When he heard the words Central 46 and Grand Inquisitor, he frowned slightly and stopped. After pondering for a few seconds, his squinting face was slightly raised, and he smiled and said, Central 46. The Chief Inquisitor? The Tsuneyashiro family? The Five Nobles? Everyone smiled triumphantly after hearing his questioning words. At this time, Yu Taifeng, who was still smiling just now, had an extremely cold expression on his face. While everyone was still in joy, they were directly pressed by a majestic Ryatsu on the ground, unable to move. Who are you? This is pure Tagulin. Central 46 and the place of daily life in the Great Lingshu Corridor. Tsuneyashiro Shiyu never thought that the other party would do such a thing regardless of his aura. When he was just about to say something cruel, only a black shadow of a sword appeared in front of his eyes. For a moment, scarlet blood splashed everywhere. After seeing the corpse in a different place, Tsuneyashiro's subordinates were full of unbelievable expressions. They wanted to beg for mercy, and in the next second they all turned into bloody corpses. When a guard patrolling in the distance, after seeing this astonishing scene, he panicked and rushed into the door of the 46 room behind him at the fastest speed. Episode 48. Revenge. Kochiki Inling looked at Yamamoto Shigekuni, who was silent in front of him, and felt a panic in his heart. After feeling the Ryatsu of Yu Taifeng, he was deeply shocked. After much deliberation, he finally decided to report his guess to Yamamoto Shijoku. After all, if this matter is true, it may have a huge impact on Seoul society and even this world. Kochiki Inling looked at Yamamoto nervously, waiting for his reply. After a long time, Yamamoto finally said, "Don't tell the story about this matter for now. You take someone to investigate it first, and report any questions in time. Go ahead." Yamamoto looked at Inling's leaving back, a look of doubt in his eyes. In fact, after Yu Taifeng appeared, he noticed the white armor. With a sharp eye, he naturally saw the clues at a glance. However, he would never have thought that Yu Taifeng would say that he had killed millions of Shushu. However, based on his knowledge of Yu Taifeng, this matter is most likely to be true. After all, being a strong man with Ryatsu and him infinitely close. Although it takes some time to do this, it can definitely be done. Yamamoto resumed his busy work, waiting for Kochiki Inling's reply. Yu Taifeng looked at the corpses on the ground indifferently, and put Zanpakuto in the scabbard. At this time, a noisy sound came from the direction of the entrance of room 46. More than a dozen elderly men wearing gorgeous robes, led by the guards, rushed towards Yu Taifeng. When these old men frowned after seeing the bloody scene that they couldn't bear to look directly at. Lord Long. It's him. The guard pointed at Yu Taifeng with a flustered expression, and said with some trembling. After a while, the noisy scene attracted many onlookers. In the direction of the entrance of room 46, many people came to this side one after another at this time. The old man standing at the forefront, after seeing the corpse on the ground in a different place, couldn't help but tremble slightly. He slowly raised his head, his eyes full of spitefulness. He stared at Yu Taifeng in front of him, his knuckles creaked. You did it all? The leader Tsuneya Dailanjichi asked coldly, holding back his trembling body. Yu Taifeng looked at everyone in front of him, but did not respond. Everyone. I would like to ask you to give the old man a face on this matter today. Don't spread it for now. My Tsuneyashiro family will remember this kindness. Tsuneya Dailongi looked at the crowd and said loudly. At this time, a middle-aged man who looked somewhat similar to Shiryu pushed away the crowd of onlookers like crazy, and several Shuanpa came to Long Yi's side. Read more at mtlarchive.com. When he fixed his gaze on the headless corpse, he pulled out Zanpakuto from his waist and roared, "My son. I'm going to kill you." Tsuneyashiro stretched out his hand to stop the middle-aged man on the side, and slowly said, "Jimming. Don't do it yet. I want to get alive." Yes. Keep him a dog. Put him in the private prison of our Tsuneyashiro's house. Young man. You will definitely regret what happened today. Enclose him first. To kill the younger generation of my Tsuneyayoi family, we must make him pay for it. Unrelated personnel leave quickly. Otherwise, you will be injured by mistake later. Don't blame us for not saying hello. More than a dozen members of the Tsuneyashiro family said in a cold tone. It seems that Yu Taifeng in front of him has now become their prisoner. Tsuneyayoi Yuichi pulled out his Zanpakuto, while raising his hand to direct the crowd. In the next second, the family members headed by him and Jimming surrounded Yu Taifeng. Okay. Very good. I will torture you slowly so that you can't survive and die. Only in this way can my dead grandson look down. Kill. Tsuneya Dailanjichi pulled out his Zanpakuto and rushed towards Yu Taifeng first. The onlookers who had long avoided, after seeing this scene, whispered. He's done. If I were, he would definitely choose to commit suicide. I heard that in the private prison of Tsuneyayui's family, there are countless kinds of horrible instruments of torture. The background of the five nobles is not a joke. Yu Taifeng glanced disdainfully, and let out a cold snort after besieging himself around the city. A burst of Ryatsu burst out from his body, and he slightly lifted his left hand into a fist. In the next second when he shook his palm into a fist, a dozen black cuboids emitting a faint purple light instantly enveloped the dozen people surrounding him. In the flashlight, these dozen black cuboids shattered like glass. With a harsh cracking sound, dozens of scarlet fire dragons appeared in the broken cuboid without warning. I saw these dozens of giant flame dragons, sending out a thunderous dragon roar across the sky. A series of screams echoed in the sky above this area. The hot air was mixed with a burnt smell, which soon filled the entire clean tag of forest. When the onlookers in the distance, after seeing this weird scene, exclaimed one after another. "Oh my god! How is this possible? Dead, all dead? He actually killed the Tsuneyashiro family in a flash. Is that the Heido 90 black coffin? Why does the fire dragon appear? Fire dragon? Is this the legendary Heido 99 5 swirling dragons of destruction? How can black coffin and 5 swirling dragons of destruction combine? Is this still Kido? While double chanting, you can chant and discard. How can there be such a monster in Siriidii? Yu Taifeng glanced at the dozen corpses around him. This time, he shifted his gaze to the other elders who were also wearing gorgeous robes. You are. Yu Taifeng, an old man exclaimed, and then backed a few steps with a panic expression on his face. How dare you kill the sage in room 46? Take him down soon. Notify Xingjuan. Go. Yu Taifeng. Hurry up and catch it. Provoking the majesty of room 46. Seeking a dead end. The remaining 46 room members who rushed for the inquiry began to rant. Yu Taifeng looked not far away. The old guys who dared to whisper slowly raised Zanpakuto in their hands and whispered expressionlessly, "The 46 room is no longer necessary." At this moment, a huge black sword shadow fell from the sky and slashed at the old man not far away. At this moment, he was busy. Yamamoto Shigekuni suddenly got up, looking coldly in the direction of purified Tagulin. After feeling the violent Ryatsu rushing into the sky, he knew instantly that the thing that worries him most has happened. In the next second, he disappeared with a sharp wind. Episode 49, Confrontation. After receiving Yamamoto's order, Kuchiki Silver Ridge brought the original crew to Hueco Mundo again. In the endless white desert, like death, there is no sign of life at all. According to the information obtained before, Yinling and his men hurried towards the entrance of the Minos Grande forest. Along the way, everyone has encountered a few emptiness, although they have also encountered it. But after seeing this team of Shinigami, they seem to have seen a natural enemy, and they start to flee frantically. After slaying the imaginary heads, Yinling was puzzled. From the time he entered the Spiritual Arts Academy to now become the captain of the squad, he has never seen a situation like this in the 500 years. Even though the imaginary heads he beheaded were all weak, medium imaginary, and giant imaginary. But since the world had Shinigami and Su, even if they were not immortal, they were at least in a state of absolute hostility. And, because Shinigami exudes a special Ryatsu, it's easier to make those imaginary lose their minds. According to the clues provided by the intelligence, Yinling led the men behind him, hurried towards their destination. After a period of trekking, everyone came to an unbuilt, white palace. When they saw the black desert with obvious contrast in front of the palace and the huge crack that was 100 meters long and could not see the depth, they were all attracted. Captain! What happened here? Is this crack formed naturally? Look, look. The desert under our feet turned out to be black. The people behind Yinling, you talked about it. After recording all these suspicious phenomena, everyone walked into the White Palace and walked towards the entrance of the Minos Grande forest. In the upper and middle layers of the Minos Grande forest, there is not much imaginary found. This reality is a bit strange. It's about to enter the most dangerous lower zone. Everyone cheers up. Kuchiki Yinling motioned to his men to pull out their Zanpakuto, with a solemn expression, leading them into the lowest level of the Minos Grande forest. However, when they are all ready to fight, read more at mtlarchive.com. It was unexpectedly discovered that the most dangerous place in the Hueco Mundo was actually hard to see the imaginary figure. Occasionally there are a few weak virtual creatures. After seeing them, they are all panicked and immediately fled to the deeper part of the Minos Grande forest. After a period of investigation and evidence collection, Kuchiki and others were shocked to discover a truth that was enough to make the entire Soul Society a sensation. Minos Grande Forest and even the entire Hueco Mundo have only less than 10% left. Especially Jillian and the other 2 levels of Minos Grande have never appeared. So that everyone is a little doubtful whether they are in the wrong place. At this time, in Kuchiki Yinling's mind, the radiant figure appeared again. Return to Soul Society immediately. Report this to the captain. While Yinling commanded loudly, he asked the Kido members who came with him to help them open the portal. After Yu Taifeng swung the sword with an indifferent expression, only a black shadow of a 100-meter-long sword fell in the air. The dozens of remaining members of Central 46 looked at the oncoming giant sword shadow in horror, and made resistance moves one after another. However, all this is in vain. At this moment, these dozens of old men didn't even have time to make a scream, they turned into a cloud of blood and disappeared. The onlookers opened their eyes one after another, and they couldn't believe how things would develop to this point. After confirming that there were no omissions, Yu Taifeng put his Zanpakuto into the scabbard, then turned and left. Many onlookers have already dispersed around, for fear that they will touch this god-killing mold and cause accidents. A majestic Ryatsu rushing into the sky, rolling in from a distance in the blink of an eye. I saw Yamamoto angrily, appeared in the clean Tagu forest. When he saw Yu Taifeng in the distance and the traces of his fight, his aura began to rise gradually. A horrible Ryatsu with a fierce aura, like a fierce forest fire, quickly pressed towards Yu Taifeng. He had already opened the Omniscience and Omnipotence and Exploration loop, and he knew at this moment that the Yamamoto heavy country in front of him was really angry. Because, Detection loop has already fed back the measured Ryatsu value to him. Yamamoto's heavy country with full firepower, the Ryatsu value on his body climbed all the way, and in a short while, it stayed at 200,000. However, Yu Taifeng did not show the slightest panic. Seeing the oncoming majestic Ryatsu, he also unreservedly elevated himself to the peak state. The two of them faced each other far away, neither of them wanted to give in the slightest. With the impact of these two Ryatsu, this area also seems to become a dead place at any time. Yamamoto glared at him and asked coldly, why? Yu Taifeng looked at each other blankly and snorted coldly, they damn it. After a brief conversation, the two fell silent again. At this time, dozens of Ryatsu also soared into the sky, and quickly began to gather in the direction of the clean Tagulin. Aren't you afraid that the old man will kill you by himself? Yamamoto was silent for a long time, before asking again. Yu Taifeng glanced behind the two familiar figures who came first. Slightly shook his head and said, if the captain only relies on the current state, I am afraid he can't do anything to me. If I really want to start, I won't have as many worries as you. Wang Yu and Mao Zhihua, who had just arrived at the scene, looked at the confronting two with serious expressions, not knowing what they were thinking about. When the captain-level powerhouses arrived here one after another, a portal tore through the space and appeared not far behind Yamamoto's heavy country. Episode 50, The Resolutions of the Five Nobles. When the portal gradually stabilized, Kuchiki Yinling also took his men and walked out of the portal one after another. At this time, he discovered that there were two horrible Ryatsu who were fighting each other without giving up. Kuchiki Yinling only noticed the details on the court. When he saw dozens of corpses behind Yu Taifeng, he realized. Captain. This. A team member approached Yinling and asked in a low voice. Stay on the spot, get ready for battle. Kuchiki Yinling's words are like a fuse, directly making the form on the field more tense. At this time, the two people who had been standing on the spot facing each other finally moved. In the sound of the collision of swordsmen, the two distinctive Ryatsu also entangled together. At first, many onlookers not far away could still see the two of them clearly. However, as the two figures gradually became blurred, everyone could only discuss each other's guesses in their hearts. As expected to be the captain of Yamamoto. This Ryatsu and speed. You can no longer judge by common sense. One step wrong step. The first genius 500 years ago will also fall today. The dignity of Soul Society is destined to be unprovoked. This is the rule. It's a shame to have worked so hard for 500 years. Kuchiki Yinling listened to the discussion of the people around him, but his heart was overwhelmed. If not long ago, he had not been ordered to go to Hueco Mundo to investigate. Maybe he now, like those discussing it, believes that Yu Taifeng has absolutely no chance of winning. However, now, he had a bold guess in his heart. Although, he himself couldn't believe the guess in his heart. However, the status quo of Hueco Mundo is right there. This is a fact that no one can change. Wang Yu looked at the two fighting in the distance, with a faint smile on his face, turned and left. The battle on the field continued, and from time to time, raging fire dashed across the sky with the sound of breaking through the air. In just a few minutes, the two did not know how many times they had fought each other. However, they still didn't have the tendency to stop, and they collided back and forth one after another after passing by. Yhwach stared at the two phantoms, the expression on her face gradually changed from indifferent to surprised. Has it reached this level? The name Kenpachi. Compared to them, it really doesn't make any sense. At this moment, Mao Zhihwa's heart was lost. I don't know how long it took, and the two of them stood in the position of the original confrontation again. Yamamoto looked at Yu Taifeng, who was a little embarrassed, not far away. He held the hilt of Ryujin Jaka with both hands, and slowly said, I can push Shirkai Zanpakuto, you are really capable. However, it is still too young in the final analysis. I saw the white armor on Yu Taifeng's body, now completely shattered. The Death Tyrant's outfit, which had long been unable to see the color, also looked tattered at this time. Read more at mtlarchive.com. The skin on his body was slightly red, and there were several flames burning slightly at the cuffs. After using Ryatsu to extinguish the flames burning on his clothes, Yu Taifeng looked at Yamamoto not far away. His horns rose slightly but remained silent. At this time, Yamamoto's original beard, which was still tied up, spread out like hair. After silently retying his beard, Yamamoto's eyes flashed with a light, and then he turned to look at the dozens of captains and seat officers behind him. After scanning a circle, he said in a deep voice, where are the 5 noble members? At this time, more than a dozen members, including Kuchiki Silver Ridge, stepped forward and stood in a row. Yamamoto narrowed his eyes slightly, looked at the silent subordinates before him, and finally said, it is unfortunate that all Central 46 was killed. The old man does not want to participate too much in today's affairs, but is ready to hand over the final ruling power to you. While you calmly deal with it, you must also reflect deeply. As for the new members of the 46th room, let your 5 nobles take the lead and vote for it. Chojiro, let me go back to the team. When everyone heard the results of Yamamoto's handling, although they had their own thoughts, they still bowed in unison and responded, the captain is wise. At this time, no one could tell that Yamamoto wanted to throw this trouble out, so that this matter could not be resolved at last. However, everyone is also aware. In the absence of the 46th room, what Yamamoto said is the golden words, even if they have any objections, they cannot refute it. At this time, even the Tsuneyashiro family, which was almost wiped out, and the members of the 5 noble families of Kuchiki, Shihuan, Shiba, and Mole City, frowned and thought. Kuchiki Inling glanced not far away, and the seemingly embarrassed figure faintly had a plan in his heart. If all goes well, the Kuchiki family will likely become the head of the 5 nobles in the future. He looked at Yamamoto, who was about to leave, hurriedly stopped in front of the opponent, and said, your captain. You have something important to report. This matter is very important and has close ties with Yu Taifeng, so. Yamamoto Shigukuni looked at Kuchiki Silver Ridge, who was blocking his way, and he had some guesses in his heart. Recognizing that this matter might be helpful to Yu Taifeng, he asked, what is the so-called? Kuchiki Inling took a deep look at Yu Taifeng not far away, nodded slightly at him, and then said loudly, Captain. Previously, you ordered the subordinate to go down to the investigation conducted by Hueco Mundo, and the results have now reached a positive conclusion. After this investigation and analysis, we can now draw a clear conclusion. That is, in the entire Hueco Mundo, including the Minos Grande forest, the only remaining void is less than 10%. When everyone heard this thing that had completely piqued their cognition, only a shocked expression remained on their faces. Less than 10%? How is this possible? Could it be that the Quincy killer did it? Impossible. More than 500 years ago, the Quincy clan was basically extinct. Could it be that Wang Su was born and swallowed his kind? After Yamamoto heard the discussion, he coldly snorted, go on. Kuchiki Inling glanced around the crowd and said again, 500 years ago, Yu Taifeng was sent to serve in Hueco Mundo. It was he who had nearly killed the emptiness in Hueco Mundo by himself during these 500 years. According to our analysis, in the next 500 years, we no longer need to send a purification team to Hueco Mundo for the balance of the world. Just let the purification team go to this world to perform the task. As soon as this remark came out, the audience was in an uproar. Although Kuchiki Inling's words didn't mention it, the meaning is very obvious. After listening to the other party's report, Yamamoto nodded slightly and said, since this discovery is made, then your 5 nobles will hold an internal resolution. Chojiro Sasakaibe glanced at the people around him, and after nodding in greeting, he chased in the direction where Yamamoto had left. At this moment, the members of the Tsuneyashiro family in various teams looked at Yu Taifeng not far away with cold expressions. The latter directly regarded them as heir, and slowly walked in the direction of the 5 nobles. The once prominent Tsuneyashiro family also withdrew from the power stage of Soul Society with this incident that killed the members of Room 46. After a heated discussion, the 5 new nobles, headed by the Kuchiki family, finally referred to Yu Taifeng's opinions and sent him to the Spiritual Arts Academy. This bloody incident that has been recorded in the annals of history, there is no end to it. The reason why Yu Taifeng chose to go to the Spiritual Arts Academy again was because he had other ideas in his mind. Thank you Jason Bob, 49xxxxx31, 197x times 810 for the monthly pass. Thank you for your support. Once again, I wish you all a happy new year. In the new year, health is rich and boring.